right, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the All Things Fulfilled broadcast. This is William Bell, and this morning we're going to be talking about part 4, dating the book Revelation. I apologize, I'm a little bit late getting in. Had some complications both with Zoom and with Facebook, rejecting my attempt to get in this morning. But we are here, and for the next few minutes, we're going to just talk a little bit more about the dating of the book of Revelation. And then next week, we're probably moving on to some other points related to the book. And as I'm studying, I'm going through some transitions because I'm learning some things that I haven't looked at before or had suspicions about. And they are, beginning to at least crystallize in the sense that they're becoming more solid in my thinking, and look forward to presenting those to you. I think that I am able to nail down something that has been an ongoing issue for me. But besides that, let's go ahead. Good morning to you, Stephen, and to Carol. It's always a pleasure to have you, to Eric. And so let's talk about, some of these things related to the dating of the book of Revelation. We have covered several of the points relating to the internal evidence. And I think that's the strongest evidence that we can have. It's kind of sad that people take the external evidence and give it more weight than the very voluminous and powerful internal evidence. But, that's for people who tend to, not have as much faith in the credibility, the authenticity, and the, surety of the scriptures. They just, for some reason, can't see that the word of God is more powerful than the word of man when things are said, especially when you can find some questions about the statements that are made by men. And because of the problems that people have concerning the doctrine of the end time, particularly, and their preconceived opinions about it, or because of the traditions that they've held for so long, it's hard for them to see a different perspective, a different alternative with that. So let's go ahead and talk about one of the issues that causes people to look at the book of Revelation from a later date. And this was a statement that's made by Irenaeus, who was the Bishop of Lyon. He lived around AD 130 to 202. And his quote regarding the what is alleged to be the dating of the book of Revelation around 180 to 190. And so that's a little over 100 years after the fact. And as we look at this quote, there are some ambiguities around it. And because of that, that would give me at least a pause to think about it in terms of, letting it weigh so heavily as evidence. But you have men who have championed it. One of the reasons so many people believe it is because a lot of people believe it. That's pretty much it, because a lot of people believe it. They go back in history and they look at so many people who have used the date to say that was when the book of Revelation was written. And, people like stacking up, names and authorities, etc., to say, well, you see, because so many people have accepted it, it must be the correct date. And I don't think that that's a good approach to understanding, something that is so powerful and so important in the scriptures. Now, here's the importance of that. Good morning to you, Robin and Julie and Gail and Thomas. The importance of that is, if the book was written in the 90s, particularly the late 90s or mid 90s, as is suggested by Irenaeus, then it means that you cannot apply the book to the destruction of Jerusalem, because that event would already have passed by some, 20 or more years. And that's the problem. And that is why it is so rejected on the part of some when it comes down to looking at the dating of the book of Revelation. It's because by accepting this later date based on the testimony of Irenaeus, then that means that you can't even look at, the fall of the temple, the destruction of Jerusalem, and any of the things in the book that seems to apply to it. They push it all in the future. They look for, historical fulfillments down the road. They apply it to things that have nothing to do with the events in the book whatsoever. And that's where the problem is. So what we have is the statement by Irenaeus. And as we said, one of the main problems with the statement is the fact that it is a bit ambiguous in the sense that they're not sure what he actually means. In other words, is he saying that John was seen, meaning the person, the Apostle John, or is he saying that the apocalypse was seen? And because of that controversy, because of that, the problem in terms of whether or not this statement is very clear, people are undecided, because depending on who you say or what he actually said, it could lean toward the early date. And if it's the other way around, of course, his statement would lean toward the late date. But even if you accept that, you still have to deal with what that particular text is saying. Another problem with it is the name that he uses in the quote, where people think that that name that has been used is the name Domitian. And there is a spelling issue with the name, as well as some grammatical issues with that name that would tend to suggest that it could be Nero, as opposed to being Domitian. Domitian's reign from 81 to 96. And of course, Nero's reign was from 54 to 68 AD. Let's see what Stephen has to say. He says, when I used to hold to the 96 AD date for the first 18 years of my Christian walk, I now know I only did so because brethren and commentary said so. Once I actually dug into the topic a couple of years ago, it was not that difficult at all to understand. I think that is precisely the case, Stephen. And to understand that it was prior to 70 and that it was essentially John's Olivet Discourse. And the strength of that position for me comes not from brethren, books, or anything externally, but simply letting the Bible interpret itself. Very good. And good morning to you, Raymond. Good to see you here as well. That's exactly the case. Now, the interesting thing for me, when I began to study the book of Revelation, it was one of the first, I guess, points of controversy, I think, that I studied when I first became a Christian. And that was the dating of the book of Revelation. Why I was attracted to it, I'm not sure. I think because some of the people that I was around had so much speculation about it, and they were talking about the mark of the beast and things of this nature. And due to some books that I bought early on in my Christian walk, which was a book on Revelation that was written by an amillennialist who took a preterist position on the book, but it was also the book of Josephus. And when I put those two together in studying it, I was led to see the importance of the dating of the book that would determine how it was to be understood. Now, I didn't even get into trying to understand much of the book at that time. It was all foreign to me, when I looked at it. But at the same time, I knew sort of just from reading the information that I have, and the writer did a very, very good job. And I'm sure, Stephen, you know who I'm talking about. This is Foy E. Wallace Jr. He did a very good job of presenting the evidence in establishing how important it was in order to determine the meaning and the importance, I would say, of the writing of the book. And so that date was very, very essential, and it was very much impressed on my mind. Now, from that, we see that the statement that Irenaeus makes has to do with when this book was written. But there are people who have objected to it for several reasons. And so I want to, go ahead and look at the statement here for a moment. And let's see. Give me just a second. I lost my place here in terms of looking at the actual quote from Irenaeus. But what he says is that and hold on here just a second. All right. Unfortunately, I've misplaced the quote. That's really bad. And I had it right here. But anyway, what the text is basically saying, or what the quote actually is saying, is that it was not long ago that it was seen, and the term "it was seen" is the ambiguous or the ambiguous statement that's made, because what they're doing is they're trying to determine whether or not that means that John was seen or that the apocalypse was seen. And so when he makes that statement, they question it, and I want to look at some of the points related to that. Now, with regard to the doubt that's associated with it, we have one statement that says the particular approach to the Domitian identity is very rarely held, even among convinced early date advocates. Farrar says that no scholar will accept this hypothesis. This must be an overstatement, since Garicki was a reputable scholar, and Stewart doubts its validity, as did MacDonald. Not only does it seem the argument above is much stronger and more widely held to be preferred. So from that point, they're talking about the two names that it could possibly be, whether it's the name Domitian or whether it's the name Nero, which is Domitianos, I think is how that's pronounced. So let's take a look at that. Okay. The problem that they mentioned with the quote is this statement: not long time ago it was seen, but almost in our own time. The second challenge with Irenaeus' statement is the possibility or spelling of the name Domitianu for Domitianicus. Now, you have Domitianu, which would have been Domitian, and then you have Domitianicus, which would have been Nero. So there's this question over the spelling of the name. And that is one of the areas where they say that there's a problem in understanding what this actually means. And so one point that they make is that it belongs in accordance with the Greek formation to the name Domitius, and not to Domitian, which would make an adjective form of Domitianicus. If it were a proper name, he says it should be written to Domitianu, and Nero's name was Domitius Nero, not Domitianus, which is the name of the later emperor. So, and that was by Stewart. So you have that problem that exists between the name. Now, another issue that came up was that we have statements that John was banished, and this was sent to me by Chris from a video that was done by Dr. Dean Furlong, and he was having a debate with an individual. I don't know whether you had a chance to watch that debate, but one of the things he mentioned was a statement by Tertullian and also by Jerome. And what he said was Tertullian says that John was thrown into boiling oil by Nero, and he came out cleaner and more vigorous than when he was than when he entered. So here's another statement that contradicts the statement of Irenaeus, where it says that he was thrown into this boiling oil at the time of Nero. And it is more in line with Nero because of the things that Nero did. Of course, he used oil to light Christians as torches, etc., in addition to other games that he did with them, using them in the arena and then, feeding them to lions. So he was the one who did, a lot of the persecuting of Christians at the time, and a lot of that was provoked through the Jews as well. But the point was, this was more in line with something that he would have done. In addition, it says, Jerome says that he was sent immediately to Patmos following the oil immersion. And so once he was thrown into this oil, and the early statements say it was done by Nero, then it says immediately he went to the Isle of Patmos. So he was banished to the Isle of Patmos. So, and we read the Syriac version on last week, at least the title page of the Syriac version, that says John was banished to the Isle of Patmos during the reign of Nero, the emperor. So there you have evidence from a couple of sources saying that this happened during the reign of Nero, which would have placed the writing of the book much earlier, prior to the destruction of Jerusalem. And so even you have the external evidence that says that. But here's something else that Dr. Furlong pointed out in his presentation, and that is that they actually changed the information to fit the date for Irenaeus, apparently because they didn't like it. In other words, they were just saying that, okay, here's all the evidence based on Irenaeus' statement that John was banished during the latter time of Domitian's reign. And so when they saw this statement that said that he was, thrown into the boiling oil during the time of Nero, they said, well, we know that's not right, so let us change it so that it matches the statement of Irenaeus. And that again shows, problems with the credibility of the statement of Irenaeus. And the last thing that I will say regarding him is this, that Irenaeus also had some other very questionable statements, and one of which is pretty much well known, was his statement that Jesus lived to be about 50 years of age. Now, it's not that you can just discredit a person because he makes a statement that's inaccurate. We all do it. And that doesn't mean that everything we say is inaccurate. In other words, he could have made an inaccurate statement about the age of Christ and an accurate statement about the dating of Revelation. So we admit that that could be the case. But at the same time, it does make you question his credibility when he says that one statement about Christ was that he was 50 years of age, which, all it takes is a casual reading of the New Testament to find that that's not true. But there's his external evidence saying that. And then that would make you question the other statement that he made, not just because he made it, but in view of all the other things that we have said concerning it, in terms of whether or not he was talking about Domitian, meaning the later emperor, or whether he was talking about the earlier one, whether or not the terms refer to John or whether they refer to the apocalypse. And it makes more sense to say that it was John that was seen near the end of Domitian's reign than to say that the apocalypse was seen near the end of that reign. One reason is because he talked about it being an ancient document. And so therefore it had been around long enough for it to be called an ancient copy, or they're having ancient copies as opposed to having more recent copies. And so I think that's very, very important. Another point that we'd like to make on that is when you talk about the persecution, a lot of people want to talk about the persecutions that happened during the time of the writing of the book of Revelation, that they were done under Domitian. And they generally will see a heavy influence of Roman persecution in the book of Revelation. Well, this is an area that I think should be restudied. One, because the Caesars, for the most part, especially up until the time of the Neronian persecution, which was kind of late, I think around 67 is when it started, or 66 or 67, but pretty close to around that time. The Caesars were very favorable. And I even if I don't say very favorable, they were favorable to Christians and defended them Here's one point regarding Tiberius Caesar. Tiberius, there's a statement that shows that Tiberius actually accepted the evidence that Jesus was the Christ, that he was the Messiah, and that he wanted to get the Senate in Rome to approve that and to have it documented. But it was the Senate who opposed it. And so even after they opposed it, he remained steadfast to his conviction that the evidence pointed to Jesus as the Christ. That doesn't sound like he was antagonistic to Christ. And you know, the ministry of Christ began during the reign of Tiberius, just like John the Baptist in the 15th year of his reign. So from that perspective, you didn't have the persecution coming from the reign of Tiberius. Now, I don't have much information on Caligula, but during the time of Claudius, you can read the New Testament regarding him. And in the New Testament, you can see that it was Claudius who was restraining a lot of the opposition by the Jews in the book of Acts. Very, very clearly, when the Jews were wanting to kill Paul, etc., and were doing a lot of the persecutions, it was it was Claudius who was preventing that. Now, it's my understanding, at least my position, and this is my own opinion, that even when you look at the situation for the man of sin in 2 Thessalonians, and you talk about the one who restrained, it's my understanding that that was Claudius who was restraining the man of sin. In other words, he was putting the brakes on the Jews, preventing them from destroying the church and preventing them from these persecutions and the extent of them, at least during that time. Now, of course, Second Thessalonians was written about AD 51 or 52, and that was just prior to Nero's reign. So you can see that that was the case. Now, when you look again at Nero's persecution, it was very short-lived, and it being short-lived, to me, doesn't satisfy a persecution during the time of the reign of Domitian, which some have argued. Robert Cruikshank also did a video on the persecution of Nero. Well, it was really on the dating of the book of Revelation, etc. But when you look at his video, and I encourage you to watch it because it's very well done. If you look at that video, you will see where he points out, based on modern scholarship, that they are turning from this concept that there was, extensive persecution during the reign of Domitian. The same thing being true from Don Preston's book. When you read that, who is this mystery Babylon? Or who is this Babylon? So Dunn also pointed out that the persecution during the reign of Domitian was very nil and nothing to really talk about. And there's really not much evidence for it whatsoever. So it doesn't fit the time frame of the book of Revelation, as does the persecution that happened during the time of Nero. And I think that that is very strong evidence that the book had to be written prior to the reign of Domitian. Now, from that, of course, you have, once again, the internal evidence that I think is much more powerful. We've talked about on last week, we mentioned the time of the wedding and what was involved there with the destruction of Mystery Babylon, as internal evidence. That was all connected to 70 AD. We talked about the and I just had it just slipped my mind on one point that we made on last week. Oh, we talked about the kings. Now, and I wanted to say this on the kings of Revelation chapter 17. There are two, I think, very plausible positions on the kings. One of them is that they are the kings of Rome. And the other is that they refer to kings of Judea, or kings related to the Jews. Now, here's the point about them. It doesn't matter which of those you take. And I've listened to speakers and who take either of the two positions. And I'll give you mine because as I said, I'm studying a little bit later. I did give you the position from the perspective of the Roman kings, but it doesn't matter, and I'm talking about Revelation 17 when it talks about there are 7 kings. If you take it from the Roman point of view, it's going to lead you to the time of Nero prior to the destruction of Jerusalem. Also, if you take it during the time of the kings of Palestine that are mentioned, and there's a very strong writer who writes about those as well, it's still going to take you to the same time frame. So either way you go, it's fine. I think the issue is where the emphasis of the evidence in the book of Revelation leads. Does it lead more toward evidence that leans toward Rome, or does it lean more toward evidence that leads to Jerusalem and Judea? And I think that's one of the areas that we'll pursue coming up in the future messages. And that will, I think, really have a determining factor on the dating of the book of Revelation. I won't say very much about it now because I'm still doing some of that research, but it's very interesting. I'm looking forward to it, and I hope that helps. But at any rate, that should at least suffice for the moment in looking at the evidence from Irenaeus. I think it's, in my judgment, I don't think it makes the cut in terms of when the book was written. It's very popular. People use it a lot. It's cited by many authorities, etc. But that's not where the evidence, the proof of the evidence should lie. It should lie in the scriptures, which is the internal evidence that actually tells you what the text says. And so with that, we're going to close the lesson this morning. Thank you for listening. Look forward to being back on next week, and have a very, very nice day. And let's see, I think I forgot to do something this morning, and that's because I had some issues trying to get in this morning, but that's okay. We'll leave it at that. Robert says, the book I used was the book of Revelation, Apocalypse, and Empire by Leonard Thompson. I've ordered that book, Robert, based on your suggestion in your video, so I haven't received it yet. Thompson holds to the late date, and he is adamant that there was no crisis or persecution under Domitian, and that's very good as well. And the point that I noted when I watched your video, that here was a person who was a late date advocate, and yet he was adamant that there was no crisis or persecution under Domitian. So this is an unbiased source, and his book was a game changer. I can't wait until I get the book to read it. And so I appreciate that very much. And I want to encourage everybody, if you haven't, I would suggest to you, Robert, that you post your video link here for those who have not watched it, and go and watch it if you really want to see a very scholarly and well done presentation on the point. As I said, Robert takes a certain view, and I know another writer who takes a different view on it, but they both take the pre or the early date. And I think they both have good evidence for that. And so I appreciate it very much. And thank you for posting that tip. But yes, I'm looking forward to getting that book, and we'll definitely read it. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to say to you good morning, and we appreciate you being here. Thank you for those of you who have commented, and we always appreciate those of you who listen and who share the information that we try to present to you. All right, thanks very much.